Hello, everyone, and good whatever wonderful moment of this day you are enjoying on your time zones as you are watching us or listening to us either now live or later on through the recording. And welcome to Beyond Wishful Thinking. This is one of the last conversations in our May mental health awareness series, and we will be looking at how can we embed well-being and mental health in our organizational culture and even in the very fabric of our processes and procedures. We have an amazing lineup of speakers, and I will ask Jessa, who is as usual taking great care of us, to bring them on the stage. And my name is Minola Jacques. I will be your co-host for the next very, very short hour. And I already see three of the most favorite people in the whole world on my screen. It already feels like sunshine on an extremely rainy, gloomy day here in Basel, Switzerland. I do encourage everybody in the audience, maybe just start easy and drop a few comments. Let us know where you're watching us from, and that will help us first and foremost know that the tech is up and running and we're not stuck in some internet backloop. And also, we will be traveling vicariously around the world through your locations. But also, a big, strong encouragement to consider this conversation as much your own as it is our panelists. Whatever topic we looked into and whatever topic we discussed, we are always fascinated by all the cultural nuances, by all the different individual experiences that just enrich every single conversation. Now, let's make the best and most out of our time today beyond wishful thinking. What I will do, as usual, I will pass the e-mic around as you appear on my screen clockwise, and I will ask you to firstly just shortly introduce yourselves. And also, because we are at the end of May as Mental Health Awareness Month, I do want to start off with a question that we have been championing, and I just want to make sure that we give the space and grace and role model it for our audience. How are you? So, Pameline, welcome. It's so good to see you.
It's great to see you too. Thanks for having me back. So, hey, everybody, my name is Pamela Eichelberger. I'm Senior Director of HR with a company called Turnpoint Services. It's actually a newish to me role. I'm in my second month, based in Tampa, Florida, but this week I'm dialing in from super sunny, actually, Louisville, Kentucky. So, thrilled to be here.
Thank you so very much. Aisha, good to see you. Welcome.
Hi. So I'm Aisha Alawadi, and I handle culture transformation, well-being, and engagement at the moment. It's my favorite thing in the world to do. I'm also based out of Tampa, Florida. It is a beautiful sunny day, and it's all smiles when the sun's out.
Wonderful. Stephanie, it's so good to have you on this panel. I knew you wouldn't miss this one for the world.
I couldn't miss this one. Thank you so much, and thank you all. What a great group we have this morning. I am Stephanie Lemick. I am a former HR executive and now the founder and CEO of an organization called the Wounded Workforce, which is all about building trauma-informed workplaces. So I am so excited to talk about building a culture of mental health and well-being because it is my passion project. It is something I am so grateful to have an opportunity to do as part of my career journey. I'm based out of Phoenix, Arizona, so it is bright and sunny, but it is still early in the morning here, and I'm feeling excited for this conversation. A little tired. The coffee hasn't kicked in yet, but the excitement is still coming through strong, and so excited to have such an amazing group here.
Thank you so very much for being here today, and everybody in the audience, please consider how are you today? Question open for you, and just let us know where you are on the emotions wheel today as you are listening to us. Now, I remember I was looking at the title of the panel, and before we dive into embedding mental health and well-being into culture and norms and processes and procedures, I would love to take a few minutes to talk about wishful thinking. I have a gut feeling that um, wishful thinking is pretty much like change management. We assume that we know what it is. It's self-explanatory. Is wishful thinking, but I do have a feeling that we all refer to it from different gaps, with different perceived distances between where we are now and what wishful thinking represents. So, if you think about what is your wishful thinking mental picture in regards to well-being and mental health in organizations, and I go diagonally always first. So, Aisha, I will ask you to be our pioneer today, and then Pameline and Stephanie come into the conversation. So, Aisha, what is your wishful thinking?
Um, I think it's a great question. The way that I view it is, when we consider things like your mental well-being, there's this underlying assumption that because all of us have emotions, we're all human, we somehow should all be able to regulate our emotions all the time. And then there is this older thought process of leave your personal life out of work, which we all know is just ridiculous. So when I think about, wishful thinking and things like that in this context, I really think what it means to me is how do you take that desire to have this well-regulated, engaged workforce and actually create processes and structures and an environment that is intentionally allowing people to show up in their best and feel included and safe and able to contribute. For me, that's what it means.
Wonderful. Great. Stephanie.
We unmuted at the same time, Pamela. For me, whenever I'm talking about mental health, one thing that comes up for me constantly is we all have mental health. So often we're talking about mental health and well-being, and we're talking about mental illness. And of course, we need to talk about mental illness proactively and normalize those conversations. But I am so hopeful that we get to a point where we're talking about mental health in a lot of the same ways we talk about physical health. Maybe not all of the ways we talk about physical health, but most of the ways in terms of normalizing it. You might talk to a coworker about a new workout routine. Oh, my doctor said I got to move more, so I've been going on walks. Well, my doctor said I need to get some exercise to help with my depression, so I'm going on walks. Those things, normalizing those and removing the stigma is so powerful. And I often think of the workplace as well. So often we're seeing amazing programs added into the workplace, but to better support mental health. And I'm all for that. I think that's amazing, great resources. But I think the biggest change maker is how we change the day-to-day experience of the workplace so it supports everyone's mental health and emotional well-being. And that's tough. So if we're making wishes, it's that big change. It's the change in the systems and processes of how we actually work. But I think that makes the biggest difference.
So actually, that was exactly, Stephanie. I was like, oh, I'm agreeing with all your things, and I think that when I think about what wishful thinking means to me, sometimes people say, oh, it's things we can't get to, right? And for me, it's more aspirational. It's hope based. So, I think that we have really seen a lot of transformation in the way that we think about mental health and wellness. And I think to Stephanie's spot on point around, not just, it's not just about the systems that we put in place, the programs we put in place. It really is about really looking at root cause and how do we make work a place that is safe, that is balanced, that provides people with flexibility and autonomy and feeling like they matter and their work is valued. Like that's where so much we bring our whole selves to work, whether or not we, there's no bringing like part of us and leaving the other part at home. So I think that really fixing, to your point around fixing the things that make work not work for everybody. And how do we make the workloads more evenly distributed and work fair and more meaningful? And how do we connect people with purpose? So those are the things that I think are truly important. The programs are wonderful. They're great. They're amazing. It's part of the dialogue around normalizing mental health as a whole topic. But I think we need to fix work.
I love the aspirational point, Pamela. That is spot on. And I think it's important, and it's an important distinction because we talk about wishful thinking. We talk about what the workplace could be. I also think we have to talk about the fact that it has to move in that direction from a purely business and talent management standpoint. When you look at two things I frequently reference is our changed relationship with work following the COVID-19 pandemic. Data overwhelmingly shows that the vast majority of us have a changed relationship in some way to the workplace. And a lot of that has to do with mental health, well-being, work-life balance, flexibility. On top of that moment, we're also seeing Gen Z starting to enter the workforce in droves. And when you look at Gen Z wants to be able to talk about and address mental health. One of my favorite stats to reference is from a monster.com survey of new grads. And 92% of new grads want to be able to talk about mental health and well-being at work. 92%. It is a stunning statistic. And if we say, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if we change the way we work instead of, like you said, focusing on the aspiration and knowing that we have to and we can get there. I think that's just, I love that you said that because it's such an important distinction.
Listening to you made two different thoughts collide in my mind. One of them is something that I heard Jimmy Carr, the comedian, say in a podcast recently. He said that we either rise to our goals or fall to our systems. And I heard a little bit of that in what you just shared. And I will link that, Pamela, into something that you started scratching. So that means that you will go first in just a few seconds. Many times we reference this in our previous Hacking HR conversations, whether we talk about the big ticket items, mental health and well-being, DEIB, even sustainability. Oftentimes we fall short of the aspiration because we still keep them programmatic. We have a program, we have an initiative, we have a series of workshops, or we have a series of trainings. So my next question, I'm still not sure how to word it, but between organizational culture and our everyday systems, which comes first? What is the dynamic between these two? Where do we start?
That's not a small question at all. We could spend a whole hour just on that topic.
Oh, I have nothing else planned.
I think there's a synergy to it. I don't think, I think that if you look at the research, what the research tells us is that you can't just take a programmatic view. It has to be, multiple prongs. So you need to have, things that are in place that meet the individuals where they are, and things that give the individuals autonomy and options to explore and safe places to speak. And you layer on top of that the programmatic things that are, the support groups, the mental health services that so many more companies, I think I've read like 80 something companies are now either providing or getting ready to start providing additional mental health services and supports as part of their benefits strategies, which is wonderful. But I think it can't just be either or. It's got to be this layered, very intentional way of talking about not only, again, like I'll go back to the meeting employees where they are, but also equipping your managers and leaders at every level with the right information and tools. We don't want to have armchair psychologists and psychiatrists diagnosing what they need to do. We need to be able to, give those folks the tools to get their employees and their people to the right places that can provide the right support and know how to guide those conversations in a productive and supportive way.
I see thoughtful nodding on the screen. Aisha, would you like to take it further?
Yeah, thank you. I think, I have been in multiple projects where there was a requirement for a shift in how things are done because there were identifiable challenges that the staff and the organization was saying, we know we have a problem. And so from my perspective, I think when you need to actually change things that are already in place, policies are extremely important in creating that infrastructure. The reason I say that is because it helps ground where you're trying to take the culture, because building a culture is about getting people to agree on a certain set of values and behaviors, and it's constant correction, and the course changes a little bit, new people come on board, old people leave, and so on and so forth. And I think that grounding in your policies and your process and your KPIs, linking mental well-being to your actual business strategy by implementing them in KPIs, that is your true north. If people veer away, it's kind of like, okay, let's pull them back. So for me, I believe that is like the foundation, but it definitely can be argued that it's a chicken and the egg type scenario.
That's one to both what Aisha and Pamela said. I completely agree. And I would add, let's talk about the fact that culture change is hard. So when we look at truly changing the culture around mental health and well-being, of course, we're talking about our organizational culture, our team culture, as we think about the conversation today. But also, we've got a lot of work to do from a societal standpoint as we look at changing the culture around mental health and the stigma around discussing mental health and well-being. So I think looking at both of those things and acknowledging, what a challenge it is can help us be realistic about how we get started. And, with the wounded workforce, with trauma-informed workplaces, we have 7 principles that guide us and how to build those processes, those cultures, those procedures that are trauma-informed. And 7 is a lot. That's feedback I get all the time. And I agree. So, what I always recommend is start somewhere where you already are doing something well. Start somewhere where your organization is already geared into talking about mental health or well being. And if it is, our organization is really good at talking about physical health. Well, how can we expand from that and talk about our mental health as a component of physical health? Maybe our organization is really good about talking about learning and development and growth. How can we shape that positive cultural trait and build it out to talk about neuroplasticity and mental health and how we learn and grow? And if nothing else, maybe your organization is really good at talking about safety. Maybe you're just really good at having policies and procedures you have to have in place to talk about safety. Well, then how can you take those concepts and expand it to psychological safety and build from there? I think what's so important is it can seem like an impossible to scale hill. It is like the Mount Everest of culture change when we think about mental health and well being. But you've got to look at those first steps you can take and be strategic about it. Some first steps are going to be a lot easier than others. And then it gets easier as you continue to roll things out. And as you've built those systems, those processes, those cultures that start to support more within your organization.
I want to jump in on something too, if I can. Thank you. Actually, go back to something that Aisha talked about too, in terms of the policy piece. I think that it's really important, and I totally agree about the policies putting in place. And I'm not usually a policy heavy person, but I feel like in this area, when we're dealing with multi-generational workforce, to Stephanie's point, Gen Z's coming in with a very different idea about how work should be done, how work, can fit their needs. It's a completely different, it's not even a work ethic. It's just a very different way of viewing how work fits into their life. And so what I see is I'll have, managers and senior leaders have a very different view of, well, they're not working 60 hours a week. That's a problem, right? So I think it's the policy piece helps to really level set in terms of what are our corporate expectations? What does great look like? What is the model that we're trying to get to, and what's the vision we're trying to get to? And it really helps to sort of, create the foundational elements to help us build out the roadmaps. I always go back to roadmaps. The journey always takes for the first step. And so the biggest projects that we have and the toughest things that we need to build, this is definitely on that list. And it's so critical right now that I think that we just take it one step at a time, but the policy really helps to lay that foundation.
So if I may add to that, I really love that Stephanie brought up various cultures. Whether or not you're working with an organization that has a footprint in different geographical locations, you are dealing with vastly different mindsets and understandings, attitudes, taboos, and so on. But also in the world that we work in now, where people are sitting across the world working remotely with each other, we can easily step into spaces that we don't necessarily understand. I might have a certain concept of what mental health means and what's allowed to be discussed, and other places may have a vastly different understanding. So creating that oneness and understanding is very important, and that comes from creating a foundation of education. This is what this means in this organization. This is how it manifests itself. This is the language that we use, and this is the language that we don't use. So it's really creating a fair ground for everyone to know where they need to get to. That's the first one. The other thing is, in terms of getting practical, how do you actually make this happen? You have to have leadership buy-in. If your leadership is bought in the sense where they've signed something off or they're nodding their heads, but they're not demonstrating it, they're not incorporating it in their communications, however that happens, they're not walking the talk, quite frankly, people will see that. Pamela gave a great example of the 60-hour work week. If you have an organization that is saying, on the one hand, we respect remote working or work-life balance, and that same organization has leaders that are, making jokes about, oh, the person who's remote is sitting at the beach, they're not really working, or, he he doesn't clock in at 11 p.m. and check emails. Like that type of behavior is very dangerous. And then lastly, and then I'll hand over back to you ladies, but I think it's important to listen to your people. People will tell you what they need, and their needs will constantly change. And as HR, it's our job to ready leadership for that, to say, listen, the strategy that we have today is not going to be the strategy that we're going to have in a couple of years from now, because the needs constantly are changing with the workforce.
I love these points, and what I love even more about this conversation is that it brings up so many other dots from previous panels, and just connect them in different ways. I wanted to bring in something that came up in a conversation about 2 weeks ago, and if I'm not mistaken, it was Carl Tischler bringing it up. We were talking about addressing mental health at the roots. And as we were looking at the root causes of burnout and depression and disengagement, I believe it was him who made the point that it is not just the workload per se. It is not just the different working hours and remote and hybrid, but it's also in many cases a complete disconnect and lack of fit for purpose of how business strategy is translated in the org design, and what set for failure experiences that triggers in organizations. So I just wanted to bring this ties into, Aisha, how you just closed your previous point. Stephanie, you talked about what experiences we allow to unfold in the workplaces. Pamela, you mentioned how we should address work itself before we go into procedures. So I just wanted to bring this. How can we make sure that the conversation on mental health is there from the very beginning, when we look at the needed business strategy, when we translate that into the operating model, into the organizational design? And should mental health be present in those conversations from the get-go? And the last spin I would put to this already layered question, I doubt that this sounds as an HR thingy alone. So, what are your thoughts?
I think, I think it's an interesting question. And I'm like, think of the checklist of things that we have to consider, either from a cultural standpoint, a business standpoint, a legal, ethical standpoint, when we're making business choices and decisions. And it's a lot. And I struggle a little with saying, okay, now let's add mental health to this and make it, a box we have to check. I think it should be more around, when I think of a true culture of mental health, we don't even have to think about it. It's already kind of ingrained in how we approach work. And a frequent thing I think of in all my years of HR experience is, how many times have we built a role, a project, a team, an objective that lacks clarity? And that's a bad business decision. That sets a lot of things up for failure, including individuals. Now, if we take that and look at it from a mental health standpoint, by creating the lack of clarity, we are, maybe making people feel anxious. We're making people unsure. We're adding layers of stress that are unnecessary. So I'm a believer that if we actually think about how to work our business in an effective way and a people first way, I think that's the real kicker, is we have to be thinking about how things impact our people. So maybe that's the kind of mental health checkbox. I think when we make the right choices, we're automatically considering mental health. I think what's important though is because we're all different and have different needs, is we do need some device to listen and receive feedback and adjust when things aren't working for our team. So that's what comes up for me when you bring that up, Minola.
Thank you. Pamela, I think I saw you unmuted a little bit earlier.
Yeah, I don't want to jump in on top of anybody. I think, yes, plus one to everything Stephanie just shared. I think for me, it comes back to, it's not even that, it's hard to quantify because it's not even like values. Everybody's got their own lens and their own values, but there's this values, ethics, doing the right thing, like that just should be part of our, our corporate DNA that we're building into, whether it's a 5-person company or a 500,000 person company. It's wanting to do the right thing for our employees, because we should recognize as humans, as leaders, that creating a safe workspace that provides for autonomy and flexibility and support, social support, helping employees feel like they belong is going to actually help the bottom line. It's going to help create, a culture and improve revenue and retention and all the metrics. There's so many KPIs you can pull out of that. It's back to your point, Stephanie, about not just making another box to check. Okay, we had the mental health talk. I did the training. That's done. It needs to be, really embedded in the cultural fabric of not only who we are, but how we operate every day. And there needs to be accountability for our managers to operate within those guardrails.
Aisha, anything to add?
Well, I mean, the ladies, that you guys, great points. So I think for me, the only thing is when I work on a project with a client and we start to discuss culture transformation, I always try to be very clear that there is no magic bullet, meaning there is no one solution, one program or an EAP that you're gonna get, or it's creating multiple ways to address challenges, to create norms, and to allow for people to start to have the conversation. And you need to understand that the reason you do that is because it's creating support all around, whether it's through creating programs, creating policies, creating feedback mechanisms, having access to mental health resources. There are various things that you can do, but I really do advise not to do one thing and then put all your eggs in that basket and be like, well, it didn't work. The other reason I think it's important to do multiple things is because you have people that learn differently, that experience the world differently. What works for some will not work for others. And you are really, when creating culture that encourages anything that you're trying to do, culture transformation, any kind of change management is about saying it and then saying it again and saying it again and saying it again and constantly creating reinforcement mechanisms. So practical terms for anyone who's like, I don't know what to do. What are some things that I can practically do? I think creating comprehensive programs, whether that's, offering the resources, as I mentioned, counseling services, stress management, whatever it is that your people are asking for. Then it's, creating this environment and fostering open and supportive conversations around the issues of well-being, and really being brave enough as HR to be the custodians and correct behavior when we see it, especially from senior leadership, that may come out of a place of ignorance. Quite frankly, I don't think anyone comes to work with the intention of being offensive or being insensitive. It's just about learning, and that's okay, to create an environment where we all can learn. And then it's how do you, as I mentioned earlier, integrate your well-being strategy into business, meaning looking at KPIs, tying people's bonuses and incentives to mental health parameters. I mean, you can do that by looking at, creating and making sure that senior leadership is promoting well-being programs, or that disciplinary action is taken if feedback comes back on certain behaviors. Flexible work arrangements. These are all things you can do to create an environment that promotes mental health. And I say this because I think some of the things that I have seen is that often leadership looks at what HR does and what we're promoting. And then when it comes to the area of mental well-being, they look at it as fluffy. Like, that's good, we care about that, but we have zero clue where to start. Do we bring a bunch of therapists on the ground? And so I think giving those practical solutions to say, look, this is exactly what we're going to do. And by the way, we're going to test it out, and over time, listen to our people's voices and be okay to pivot. I think that's really important to kind of help guide them through the process of how do you create this culture that we're talking about.
I think that's so important, because one thing I consistently hear is, I don't want to be a therapist. I don't have the capacity. I don't have the tools and resources to be a counselor or therapist. You don't, and you shouldn't have to be. Absolutely not. And I think a lot of times we talk about mental health and well-being in a way that is very clinical, talking about mental illness, talking about certain things. And it's scary when let's think about, a manager new to their role, maybe new to an organization, an employee is bringing up a mental health challenge or is having issues. How scary is it to go, oh, I don't want to do something wrong, I don't know how to approach this? How many resources does that manager have really to rely on? And sometimes what I like to do is reframe and say, stop thinking about, I have to think about mental health, and instead think about, how can I connect to this person as a human? And instead of asking, how is your mental health, which can feel really weird, ask, hey, how are you doing? I've noticed you seem a little different. Is everything okay? That seems like something we would say to each other, especially if we have a relationship. And I think kind of removing the barrier of, oh, I have to talk about mental health, I have to be an advocate. I think it can be really helpful to reframe things in a way that feels normal. And then, like you said, then connect folks to the resources that can get really meaty, really into some of the harder, the trickier stuff to navigate. And folks who spend their lives doing that work can connect in. So I'm a big fan of that. And a great tool for that, if you have the time, especially as an HR professional, I'm a big fan of mental health first aid through the National Council of Mental Wellbeing. It is a great tool to start thinking about how to have some of those conversations, how to recognize those things, and then know when it's time to kind of pass things off, so you don't have to put all of that weight on yourself as a leader, as a manager, as an HR professional.
Thank you. Pemeline.
I think yes to everything I'm hearing. Absolutely. I mean, we talk about sort of, empowering our employees to feel like they've got that safe space, to giving our managers the right tools to help ensure that they are able to make the right connections at the right time, whether it's directly or by redirecting into the right resources that can provide the support. I think I want to take a step back and think about, you had mentioned, so the organizational design around, like, how does that impact? And I think, I've been in this role now not even 2 months, and I'm looking at org designs. And I think one of the advantages that we have today, as HR leaders and HR practitioners, is data. And so I just met with our benefits brokers yesterday and went through a deep dive of our utilization rates. And I'm looking at, like, holistically, like, what are people dealing with, and where are we, seeing, like, a need for help, and being able to take that data and use it to craft, a roadmap around the things that will actually tie into what our employees are utilizing today in terms of our medical plans, and the feedback that we're getting in terms of our engagement surveys. So we have for a new role, I was thrilled to know that we have those data points to be able to come in and start the dialogue in a little bit more of a formal way than had been happening here prior. So really taking data and using data to make informed decisions, and using data to influence outcomes in terms of getting buy-in and alignment, around your leadership team, helping them understand the importance of, whether it's belonging or knowing how to make the connections, what to say, what not to say, because you've got folks that best intentions, they're going to start playing armchair therapists, and that's not something we want our managers to be doing, obviously. So I think really thinking about sort of getting the information so that everybody understands, where your workspace is coming from, the specific challenges to Taisha's point, every company is going to be different in terms of the challenges that they're facing. Every industry has different, different metrics. And I know for us, stress is one of our major causes of occupational illness. And so you can't just look at the programmatic view, it's the org design. And okay, the org structures that we have in place today, are the spans of control that we have in place today, are managers overloaded? Are they able to support and develop our people in a meaningful way? Or is everybody just overloaded with too much and too little resources? So I think really looking at programs, looking at org design as a way of sort of managing the workload and the balance and making sure that folks have the space to grow and learn and develop and do work that is meaningful.
Well, we are quite a few minutes into the second half of our conversation. I do believe that Hacking HR hours are just shorter than regular hours. And we'll just welcome everybody who joined us over the last 20 something minutes. And in case you didn't hear that and you think, oh my God, I missed bits of this conversation, you can always go back and check the recording, either through the same link. It will be available a few minutes after the live is wrapped up, or hackinghrlab.io. Now, I do want to make sure that we make the last bit of our time together very inspiring in an actionable way. So I would invite you, is there any inspiration that you can share through a story of a particularly meaningful going beyond wishful thinking, something that you led or you witnessed or you saw within the context of the workplaces that you were exposed to or familiar with? And I will just give you a few seconds to think about, and then we will do this popcorn style just as inspiration strikes. Or we can do this alphabetically.
Mine isn't, I'll throw something out, and it's sad, but I think the impact is what's inspirational. So in a prior role, we had an employee that actually passed away, and we realized that there was a huge gap in what we were doing and how we were handling that in terms of family support and how to make sure that they were connected to the right resources and not just handing them off to the EAP or the benefits team. And so we actually baked out a policy that supported if we had either an employee pass or an employee relative pass. We actually baked out a really comprehensive policy and programs to support the impacted family members and even teammates through the next steps in the process. And while it was a horribly sad and heartbreaking time, because this is a long-term employee that was just beloved by so many, I think working through the project and figuring out how to lift the weight, but more importantly, how to create the community and to lift up those people that were impacted was so impactful for me, impactful for my team, certainly. And I know that the legacy that we left in that space is probably, I think, one of the most important and best. I hate the phrase best in class, but it really feels like we left something behind that will have a lasting impact on the people that it touches. So that's probably what I'm the most proud of in terms of mental health and well-being. And I think it's just one of the high points that I'm the most proud of.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
What a perfect example. I think, unfortunately, so often a loss is, devastating for teams, but it's also, it can be a catalyst for a variety of organizational changes. And, I've seen that play out a few times in my career as well. I'm going to keep with my keep it simple theme a little, because I know it's such the mountain to climb. And, what's interesting is this was actually a safety initiative that stuck with me. When I was working for a big construction organization, one of our safety leaders had these little badges made or put on the safety vest, and it said, "Make it personal." And people would put something in there about themselves, about why they came to work, why they wanted to go home safe, whether it was a picture of their family, their friends, a hobby, whatever, but something to make it personal. And it was so simple and it was so profoundly impactful because simply asking someone to show up a little more directly as who they are and connecting to that humanity really shaped relationships, shaped a sense of caring. And yes, it was focused on physical safety. How can I be committed to helping these folks go home safe to those whoever or whatever is in their make it personal badge? It also connected more to that human side of the individual. Who are you? How can we connect? Create that sense of community and belonging. And also, maybe when things are tricky, say, hey, is everything okay? Keeping in the construction theme, I've also seen hard hat stickers or, coins, badges that have QR codes with information to mental health resources as well. So I think it can be something profound. It can be a big change. It can be, I know we hate the term best in class, but it can be a best in class procedure or process, but also can be something really simple that calls in everyone. So don't overlook that, especially knowing a lot of HR professionals are working with limited resources.
Thank you, Stephanie. Make it personal. What a great initiative. Loved it. Aisha.
So I think something I'm most proud of is on a project there was the requirement to implement a EAP, an employee assistance program, which is I think wonderful. I think every company should have one if possible. But what made this very special for me was that they went above and beyond. As we started introducing the concept of the EAP, and this was a global organization, so the understandings of how to use this, what is it used for, what's okay, what's not. There was a very large education campaign that we rolled out, and the appetite people had and the excitement levels was just something that we didn't expect. And the cherry on top of all of this was that we actually had people kind of put up their hands and say, look, I want to be involved. I don't know how. And because of that enthusiasm and that desire to kind of make this part of the culture, we actually ended up creating a program where we had people who were these well-being champions on various floors across the globe who would act as your support system, your kind of guiding light to like, here's everything that you have available to you, explaining whether it's an ERG, an employee resource group that you can join, whether it is something from the EAP that you have, or maybe a health policy that we have as an organization. And it really just created this ownership and pride and desire to have these conversations naturally. Like people would give information. If somebody was struggling, they were there to say, you know what, I've been there. This is what I did. Let's go talk about it. And it created this camaraderie and this just great group of folks. And you just realize that HR can light a fire, but it really is up to your people to take it and run with it. And that is kind of, I mean, that's the one that sticks with me. That's what I'm most proud of. And I think it showcases the power of giving people what they are requesting and then trusting them and treating them like adults to say, that's a great idea. Where would you like to go with that? And they turn it into something that I never could have imagined.
Wonderful, wonderful questions. Now, throughout the conversation, all of you mentioned some really powerful questions. You mentioned reframing conversations, and I don't think that mentioning this in the presence of a journalist, you would expect that it won't come back to haunt you. So my next question is, do you have any signature questions, or do you have any questions that you have found particularly powerful to unlock or to spark or to reframe conversations around mental health in the workplace, or it can be an invitation to a reflection. So do you have some, maybe not signature questions, but some signature moves to make these conversations particularly powerful and constructively disruptive at the end of the day? And I see smiles, so I know you do.
You want us to give away all our secrets?
Well, yes.
Yeah. Aisha, do you want to go? Aisha, go back on mute. I can. Mine is going back to Stephanie's theme of keeping it simple. And one of was a prior leader who I really admired. And it's not just for mental health and wellness, but like the sort of the secret sauce for me is you gotta have a relationship first. So I'll preface with that. But if I have a magic wand, it is the simplest question opener. But it also sort of like creates an instantly little safe space for someone to feel like, going back to that aspirational piece, we can do anything here. And so you can toss out these big, huge things that feel like gigantic, and then it begins to dialogue. Okay, well, how do we get from where we are today? How do we get on that path? So I love using the magic wand question as sort of like the key to unlocking, the dialogue. And it's as simple as that for me. I think that's the most powerful tool, one of them.
That's wonderful. Aisha, would you like to add?
Yeah, Pamela, and I hope you don't mind. I'm going to be using that one. So there are actually two that I really like to use. The first is asking people if they are, how are they, and standing and being interested to actually hear what they have to say. That is how you build relationships, and by doing that consistently and with care, things come up eventually and they feel comfortable sharing. That's one. The other is if I'm dealing with resistance from leadership to implement something, my favorite phrase is, what are the chances that, I can get a budget or whatever it is? But when I start off with what are the chances, I find that the answers usually are positive as opposed to like just throwing the information at them. So that's been one that has worked wonders for me.
Thank you.
I have a pretty direct approach in with the work that I do. So this might not work for all of you, but I think a lot of feedback I got when I first started the Wounded Workforce was, I don't know, Stephanie, you want to talk about trauma at work? That seems like something people don't want to do. And they don't. Honestly, trauma is a scary word for a lot of people. And then I like to break into what trauma is and the broad definition to help people kind of open, understand, hey, oh, this is what we're talking about. And then I like to share the statistic. 70% of US adults self-identify, so raise their own hand and say, I've had a traumatic experience in my lifetime. And I think while trauma can be scary, I think demystifying that, providing a sense of clarity is really powerful. And I think it's a different approach to talking about both mental health and inclusion that we haven't tried in a lot of ways when we look at approaching the workplace. And so I have this very specific way of approaching and going into having that conversation. But I think it opens doors that previously we weren't even looking at. So that's my very unique approach to this question. And the question I like to talk about is, do we have an understanding of what trauma is? Do we have an awareness of its prevalence? And how do we think about how it's showing up at work? Because it is impacting work as a whole, and it certainly impacts mental health experiences.
I did see a question coming up in the comments, and I would like to bring it into our conversation, maybe with a small spin and adaptation. How can we use, and what data points can we use to really make the business case for embedding mental health in our organizational culture? Because most of the time, we have data. We have data to the point where we are drowned in data. But what data do we harness for the best mental health embedded in organizational culture narrative? Pamela
Aisha,
and
go ahead.
Aisha. Okay, Aisha, go ahead.
Aisha, you go first.
Go ahead.
I always try to go back to metrics. And so I would default to engagement scores, NPS scores, right? Just looking, and that's just high level looking at how engaged are your folks. I look at attrition numbers. Where are there bubbles of issues coming up? Like, where do we see different patterns? I go back to, again, our benefits information. I look at utilization rates. I look to see trends in terms of, are we seeing, are fewer people taking advantage of preventative care? Are we seeing an uptick in the number of cases where people are going in for mental health issues? You can get that information aggregated and be able to see trends to understand, where you are and how you can use that information to create measurable action plans. So if we know that in your company you've got a higher than what you would expect to see for your market and industry utilization rate for mental health, that means you need to do more work in that space with your leadership team and building out, again, meeting employees where they are. So individual things that they can do, programmatic things that will reach groups of people where they are, and then manager capability training to help improve how your managers are handling the work. And then looking, obviously, the front of the line, going back to that, how are we working and what is that? Is that contributing to making work better or making people sicker? It's one of the two. So for me, those are the things we measure. Some of them.
Thank you. Aisha.
I think Pamela got all of them.
Yeah, Pamela did a mic drop.
Well, don't don't do the spoiler, Stephanie. We have the wrap up mic drop round in just a few minutes.
No, I just did mine. Process.
Now, I do want to acknowledge and I do want to be mindful of the fact that oftentimes, well, all the time actually, we do have people in the audience who are an HR function of one. And what we talked can be so overwhelmingly inspirational for people who are part of large HR teams. If you could give one piece of advice to an HR function of one, of what to take from this conversation, either you want to highlight a previous point or you want to make a specific point just for them, what would that one be?
I'm ready to go with this one, especially for HR functions of one. You have got to prioritize your own self-care and mental health. I am a big believer that there is a lot of unaddressed, undiagnosed compassion fatigue and even secondary trauma in our industry when we look at HR professionals. And it is so easy as a department of one to pile more and more and more on yourself. So remember, have an accountability partner and take care of yourself and your mental health first. Otherwise, you will not be able to invest in the mental health and well-being of your team in the way you want to. So number one thing to take away from that is really focusing on that. And then I'll leave anything else for my mic drop later. I won't add anymore.
Wonderful. I will hold you to that. So, Aisha.
If I can just add, I think, we've all been in that situation in some capacity. Make allies. That is the most important thing. Whether you are an HR organization of 30 or just one, you are going to have much more success if you can work through people, especially in the business. Not only are you getting buy-in, but you are having almost like your champions on the ground. I think that is a guaranteed measure or a guaranteed way of making sure your programs don't just live and die with you and your effort.
Wonderful.
I feel like there are too many mic drops that just happened. So I think I'll build on Aisha's point. I was just going to say it's relationships. as we've all been in that role as an HR team of one, trying to move mountains. And I think just focusing on how do you build the relationships, and being mindful and intentional about it, and sort of I say that the next step in that is you build other people's capabilities, whether it's colleagues or managers. Just by having the relationships and having the dialogues, you're raising awareness, and you should see movement just based on that things. And a 1% shift, it's still a 1% shift. And when you start thinking about baby steps, one person can have a humongous impact on an organization over the course of 3 months, 6 months, a year.
Mm. Well, thank you so very much for this round of rehearsals for mic drops, because we are now entering the wrap up official mic drop round of answers. And this is a free topic round. I want to make it easy for you. So, whatever it is that you are feeling as we wrap up this conversation, but also as we wrap up our May series dedicated to mental health, what is it that you want to leave with our audience? I will give you a few seconds to think about it, and then I will pass, in the interest of time, I will pass the mic around counterclockwise. So we will go Stephanie, Aisha, Pamela. But I will just want to say a wholehearted thank you to everybody in the audience who was with us today and throughout the month. We do hope that you will live every day and every month as Mental Health Awareness Day and Mental Health Awareness Month for yourselves and for the people around you. So, Stephanie, your mic drop moment.
I would say keep it simple. Don't overthink it. It can be scary to talk about mental health, but know that if you're coming from a place of genuine care and not trying to overstep, that connecting with someone, saying something, supporting someone is always going to be the right thing to do. So keep it simple. Keep it simple from a personal and from an organizational perspective.
Thank you. Aisha.
So from an HR perspective, for the HR folks out there, I would say, because this is such an important topic and you want buy-in from the hardest nosed CFO you have, use your data and let the data inform the proposals that you come up with, and be unwavering. But from a personal perspective, we're all people. And I think that what you can do is control how you show up in your behavior, and how you allow for others to show up around you. And it's being nice is free. Asking someone how they feel is free. Smiling is free. Be the person that you would like to meet.
Wonderful.
I'm never answering this question last again in these groups. So great answers. I think for me, it's two things. One is, and I'll steal Stephanie's limelight here, is take care of yourself first, because you can't take care of everybody else. And as HR professionals, we face, I think, a higher rate of burnout and secondary trauma than anybody else, just about, especially post-COVID times. So take care of yourself is my first piece of advice. And the second piece of advice is really to stay aspirational. You can be aspirational and take that one step. You can be aspirational and keep it simple. You can be aspirational and use the data. All those things apply, but don't get so bogged down in thinking it's too big. I'll never get there. I think we have to keep hope going and realize how much this touches every aspect of our work lives, of even at home, and just keep pushing forward and making the change and being that person, embodying who you want to be and what you want to see at work.
Pamela, Aisha, and Stephanie, thank you so very much for taking the time and the energy to be here today. And I will just wrap up with one of the most powerful comments we have ever received during our panels. It was quite early in May, and we were talking about the why it is important for leaders to actually truly, genuinely, deeply understand the people on their teams. And someone in the audience dropped a comment, "If you can't see me, you can't lead me." And that was so powerful. It stayed with me. So just a kind reminder to everyone, if you can't see me, you can't lead me. Thank you. I hope I will get to welcome many of you to our June series, and I will see you on the other side of a restful and joyful weekend soon. Thank you, everyone, and thank you so much, Jessa, for all your help. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.